Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angela Peacock, and I'm a subject of the film Medicating Normal. I also volunteer and do outreach to help spread the word and facilitate conversations just like this one. I'm so excited to bring you our 6th live interview with one of the wonderful individuals that we have met along the journey of making and screening the film Medicating Normal. Our guest today is Dylan Lundgren. Dylan is a TEDx speaker and an addiction recovery advocate. His mission is to help individuals and organizations increase engagement in the recovery process and improve long-term outcomes. You can find more information about him and his work at dylanlundgren.com. Thank you for joining me today, Dylan. I'm excited about this conversation. Can you say a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So first I'll start off by reiterating what you just said, which is that I'm an addiction recovery advocate and speaker. And what I'm really passionate about is helping people increase engagement in the recovery process and improve long-term outcomes. And part of the reason for that, which I talked about a little bit in our post-film discussion, was that over the years with the opiate crisis, I've seen both of those metrics, in my experience, decrease. And so I really want to start conversations around how do we increase those metrics and what are the things that are correlated with those increases. So I'm really excited to be here today, and it's great to see you, Angie, and let's dive in.
So I'm going to give a little background on Dylan. Dylan is from like Massachusetts, and he wanted to do a screening so bad, and we wanted him to do a screening, and then we just had to like wait for the right opportunity to do it, because today we're going to be talking about addiction, and I want to be very clear with our audience. Most of our audience are people that are considered physiologically dependent on psychiatric drugs. So it's kind of like a tangential issue. So I just don't want anyone in the audience to feel, offended or sensitive. That the talk, if you're taking your medication as prescribed, you're not running out early, you're not craving it, you're not having all these intended consequences, please understand that we're not talking about that kind of use. We're on the addiction spectrum, but it is a tangential issue that's happening to people in our community, that when they say, I want to get off of this drug, that they can be forced into detox, they can be, go to an addiction medicine doctor. So I just want to be very, just be gentle with us. We're not attacking anyone. We're just having a conversation, and we just want to hear from different points of view and different tangential issues and populations. So in that spirit, please join us today. All right. So I'm going to start the conversation off with a few questions, and then we're going to open it to the Facebook Live audience. And Nicole is in the comments, so she'll be texting us the questions that you all have on Facebook Live. Our audience. Oh, wait. Okay. So the first question, you ready?
Ready.
Dylan. All right. What is the difference between addiction and misuse?
That's a great question. I was going to touch on that as you were talking. And I just want to say this is the first time on Facebook Live, so this is pretty cool. So the difference between addiction and misuse is, I think of this as a spectrum, like you touched on, Angie. And when I think of addiction, what that is really twofold. It's a mental craving with a physiological dependence. And the way it was described to me, the difference was that mental craving piece. So someone can be physiologically dependent, but they're not necessarily going to have a mental craving that makes them want more and do things against their values to get more. Right. That being said, physiological dependence can lead to addiction, but isn't in and of itself addiction. And there's a whole spectrum there. Totally. So, you could be really early on. I think you might know better than me on this, but I'm pretty sure benzos can take a very short period of time to get physically dependent. I mean, short, like a week. Right. Like that's what I thought. It was somewhere around there. So like a little over a week, which is like an insanely short amount of time. So in that like little niche, you can be physically dependent in like a week, Mm-hmm. Others can take a while longer. And then addiction also, there's a spectrum. That being said, how do I know where I am on that spectrum? Am I doing things to get more when it's not prescribed? Am I doing things against my value system to get more, or as a result of the substance that I would never normally do? Those are good questions to ask as well.
Yeah, and through all these screenings, the thing that I've noticed the most is these people want to get off. They do not want to be on these drugs. And so that's
Yeah.
almost like opposite, where you're not craving it, you're craving to get off of it, like I don't want to take
Yeah.
this anymore, but I can't get off fast enough, but I have to get off slowly. So I just wanted to mention that there's also, on the other end, that these people that are in the Medicaid normal audience are
Yeah.
generally like, I want to get off,
Yeah.
So that's a good conversation. Okay, so next question is, why does or doesn't treatment work? And now when we say treatment, we're talking about addiction treatment.
Obviously, I'm just one individual, so I don't know my take on this. There are a few things I've found that are helpful and are harmful in the treatment process. And that being said, this is a humongous industry, so there's so many resources out there. Why does and why doesn't treatment work? So the first thing I would say that's an often overlooked challenge in addiction treatment is biochemical influences. And what I mean by this is the things that can affect our biology and our psychology that we're not normally looking at. So for example, medications are a piece of this. Now, I'm not a doctor, so obviously you want to check with a doctor before starting or stopping any meds. However, from what I've seen from other professionals and clients, certain medications can disrupt the recovery process. For example, gabapentin is a highly prescribed medication in addiction treatment, and yet there's study after study showing its high potential for abuse, showing its link to overdose, because if someone's taking gabapentin and they relapse, their likelihood of a deadly overdose goes up.
Wow.
A study showing gabapentin blocks the formation of new brain synapses. So if you're trying to change a habit, learn something new, blocking new brain synapses isn't that good of an idea.
Wow.
And the list goes on. And that's one medication. However, there's hardly any discussion around that. And that's under the heading of biochemical influences.
Yeah.
Food, diet, things like this, media, can also impact someone's mentality. It's almost like being in intensive care at first.
Yeah.
And if the addiction's really severe, then they need that period of time where they're really supported and held, not just physically in a physical space, but in a biochemical space as well, so they can heal and start to have a more normal reaction to life, including building healthy coping mechanisms, as opposed to running for the first substance,
Right.
which could be, an potentially addictive medication if there's no boundary or conversation around that. That makes sense?
Totally. And I guess I'll bring my story into this just a little bit, just to give context. I don't really talk about this much because it's a very interesting twist. But 14 years ago, I did become addicted to opiates from being prescribed by a doctor. But it also had to do with, I was prescribed 18 drugs at the same time, and I was out of my mind. Out of my mind. Okay. So I've been to detox 3 times. I've had that experience. I did participate in 12-step groups. And I always wondered, looking back, why have I never had an addictive personality before or after or since? What was it about that period of time? So I did a dig and I started looking through my medical records. And what I saw was that I was taken off of benzos right before the opiate addiction happened. And to me, now with hindsight, I'm seeing, oh my God, I was on so many meds, I couldn't think straight. And then the opiates made me feel a little better. And you're going to do what feels better, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I'm medicating the benzo withdrawal, and nobody ever,
no one made that connection.
I didn't make that connection till like a year ago when I, systematically dug. So I've had the treatment center, that experience. It wasn't a good one. And I think it's still alive and well today, that when you come and you present with an addiction, the people there, the doctors there, they're very much like, okay, you have a comorbid condition that was your reason for using, and let's tackle that comorbid condition. So that's when people get diagnosed with bipolar, with depression, with post-traumatic stress. But it's
totally.
And I also saw it as I was a freelance at a treatment center in Southern California, that you're gonna feel like shit when you come off of street drugs. Like, it's just gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
But why are we labeling that a new disorder? And why are we medicating that? So what do you think about what I just said?
Great question. And one of the doctors that I go to is this guy, Dr. Montez, who I touched on a little bit on the last panel discussion. And the reason, by the way, that I do this is I do believe, having been in recovery for 16 years and having worked in the field for 16 years that I have a certain amount of credibility,
Yeah.
right? That being said, I'm not a licensed social worker and I'm not a doctor. So what I do to back up that experience and to verify it, see, well, maybe my perception's off, is I look at professionals who might be in the minority, but nonetheless, they are the professionals and they seem to have a good grasp on this, what we're talking about from our own experience. And Dr. Montez says exactly what you just said, which is that clients come into treatment and their effects of detox, and not all the time, but generally speaking, the effects of going through detox, in other words, the healing process, are attributed to a disorder. So that could be anxiety, that could be bipolar, that could be depression, that could be, fill in the blank. And it's looked at as a separate disorder rather than what will be called substance-induced anxiety, substance-induced depression, substance-induced
Or even
blank.
withdrawal induced, like detox.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're coming off of meth, you're probably going to be depressed because the pendulum is going to swing the other way. You're coming off of opiates, you're probably going to have anxiety because you want to not be sick and you like, I got to get something to feel better, Yeah.
Totally.
Yes,
I mean, it seems so simple, and yet in the culture, and this is one of the things I would have touched on before with addiction treatment is the power of groupthink or culture. So when you're in a certain group for a while, those beliefs, those attitudes start to kind of sink in, even on a subconscious level. And Daniel Coyle, who's a famous author, talks about this in his book, The Culture Code. And he talks about powerful groups, and he talks about not so powerful groups. And a lot of what he talks about aren't actions so much as beliefs and structure, And so if you go into addiction treatment now, not all places, there's some good places out there. And maybe at the end we could talk a little bit about this, but this ties back into the film because a lot of this is around medication. So if you go into treatment, one of the first things they'll do in a lot of places is look at the medications, whether you're on them, what do we need to tweak? And not tweak in a way what's not working. In other words, if something's not working, the viewpoint is which medication do you need to fix it? Which medication do we need to increase to fix it? Which medication do we need to change to fix it? Never is it possible a medication isn't working and we need to get rid of it. And when you're in a structure like that, after a while, you just start thinking, oh, medications are the solution, right? Because that's the way culture and groupthink works. Unless you've had severe experiences like we've had, and it's like something happens, like, wait a second, like popping out of the matrix for a minute, like, whoa.
Yes. Like for me,
like
it
something's
was
off here.
Wait, if I'm on all these medications, why don't I feel better? They obviously are not working, because if I'm on 18, I should feel amazing. Like, why don't I feel good? But it took me to realize that, not a doctor saying, so like what you're saying is, instead of saying, maybe we should take some of these away, it's always, let's add more, because they're, why are we thinking that way? It should be the opposite.
Yeah. And your story is so powerful. I didn't know it was that many. That's wow.
Yeah, 45 in a 13-year period.
Wow.
I have basically brain damage, but anyway, that's beside the point. Okay, so I mean, for the audience, I know Dylan has some of his people in the audience that haven't seen the film yet. Basically, the film is about 5 people that have a relationship to psychiatric drugs for different reasons, and they kind of go through that process of either am I going to stay on or am I going to come off, or like maybe a harm reduction approach, and then when they do come off, what happens. So just for you all that haven't seen the film, that's kind of the gist of the film. We keep referring to the film. So we want to tie the addiction to the medication is all. But so can we talk about, I didn't write this down, but let's talk about harm reduction for a minute. Harm reduction from addiction standpoint and a psychiatric drug standpoint.
This is a very controversial topic, a very hot topic in the addiction treatment industry. Similar to addiction and misuse, it's a spectrum. So there's some people that are like adamantly against it. Some people are adamantly for it. And I'm going to be honest, at first I was against it. And over the period of time, trying to be more open-minded and learning, and also hearing other people talk about their experiences with medications like Suboxone, I've found some people who it's helped. So harm reduction is exactly what it says it is. How do we take this crisis and reduce the harm, right? Unfortunately, there's very little discernment. And with medications in general, just like we saw in the film. And I'll get back to harm reduction in a minute, but I just want to say your quote in the film is one of the most powerful quotes. And it's the one where you said in I forgot how many years, but in this number of years, not once did somebody ask me. And I saw social workers, I saw therapists, I saw not once did somebody ask me about the medication being a problem. Not one time. And I always use that quote, and I get tingles when I say that, because the lack of discernment is the problem. I don't think it's necessarily the meds or harm reduction is a problem. I think it's the fact there's no discernment. So when I talk about harm reduction, what is it? And then where is it headed? Well, it started probably with a good intention, but what I've seen over the course of time is that medications like Suboxone are just flooding the addiction treatment industry. And in a lot of sectors, I don't know, at least on the East Coast and people I've talked to, and I've also worked in Florida, and this was about 6-7 years ago now when this kind of started to escalate. And right now, I've seen it massively flooding in the addiction treatment industry. And from that standpoint, I haven't seen much success. And if you look at something like Suboxone, as far as I know, originally it was meant for short-term use. And there's doctors speaking up. I was just reading an article today who said it's horrible for long-term use and is going to lead to disability and impairment. You know, Suboxone blocks up to 80% of a person's feelings, is correlated with misuse. You know, individual who wanted to remain nameless said, and also a professional colleague said, she's never seen anybody correctly use their Suboxone outside of a clinical setting. So if they're prescribed Suboxone, no one she knows of uses it like they're meant to. They usually shoot it up and then sell the other half to get opiates or something like that.
So let me back up just a minute so that make sure the audience, because maybe our Medicating normal audience might not know about this, but basically when you come off of opiates from the street or, you know, heroin or pain pills or whatever, they would put you on Suboxone as a way to reduce overdose, reduce death. And it does work. 50% of overdose deaths are decreased by people that are taken from heroin over to Suboxone. But remember, it's a pharmaceutical, and it prevents you from, you know, if you, am I right? If you were to get high, you wouldn't feel anything. And it kind of mutes the craving, or no, it just mutes the craving. I think that's how it works.
Yeah. And I've heard mixed things on this too. So the narrative is that it would keep you from getting high, right? However, numerous people I've talked to said it gets you high. And yeah, so this is one of those things where it comes back to like the film, right? How much of the information that we're getting from the pharmaceutical company, which gets to the doctor and gets to us, how much of that is transparent?
True. Right? Yeah.
So with Suboxone, and thank you for clarifying that. I have so much experience in like this one little sector that I forget this isn't where everyone's coming from.
I'm just bridging the gap. Yep.
Cool. So with Suboxone, it's it's supposed, both of the Suboxone and just like methadone was supposed to, you know, cut down on this stuff. And to be fair, it has, and I've met some people it's helped. However, I've seen a lot of people who it seems to have kept them going in the cycle. So they'll stay clean for a while, but because of, I'm guessing, because of one of the developmental tasks of recovery is feeling, right? Ability to feel, and to feel our pain too. That's an important part of healing and growing, and letting our brain change to have a better response. We have to feel some of that pain and then realize, oh, this is the right thing to do. Well, with Suboxone, it blunts that process. So, and I've seen this in clients in certain reactions to things that are on Suboxone. I've seen this also in group settings where over the years, the engagement in groups has gone down. And I think part of that isn't just Suboxone. I think it's medications in general.
It's true. Oh God, my ex-husband is on it, you know, and I feel like he's not living up to his potential because of a blunting, you know. And even my own process, my own healing process, even coming off psych drugs, part of like reintegrating a life is like learning what I like again, learning what brings me joy outside of, you know, like I was so medicated for so long, I didn't even go out of my house, you know, like that's
Mm,
part of learning to live again.
yeah.
Oh, and then you said one more thing about Suboxone. Hold on, I'm thinking. Yeah, oh, I remember from school. Okay, I did take this class in the master's program about Suboxone actually occupies the space where an opiate would take. So it hooks onto that receptor so that if any if any heroin came in there, there wouldn't be a receptor for it to take. Okay, but so yes, it's occupying that receptor site, which may or may not feel that, meaning you might feel a little bit of, okay, I feel better, because you're instead of going through withdrawal, it's preventing that, right? So you come off of heroin, you go right on Suboxone, it occupies the receptor site, and then you don't experience withdrawal. But the downside to that is, like you said, you're not reintegrating emotion, you're not
Yeah.
you're still like dependent on something, which for some people that's what they need, and I have to give
Mm,
a nod to that.
for
I've
sure.
met people that say, I wouldn't be able to live if I don't take this. And I have to say, well, I'd rather you be here than die. I mean, obviously.
Definitely.
So I
And
took,
that's,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go for it.
Well, that's the crux of the conversation, right? Is who really wants it and needs it? Because there's so many people, it's just handed out. Like right at this point, with the Drug Addiction Treatment Act, which was in 2000, which allowed uh, potentially addictive medications to be prescribed in treatment, and then in 2016, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, which increased the number of clients that a doctor could prescribe to and included physician assistants and nurse practitioners. So it was just basically like spanning out the ability for, and keep in mind, this is going to be the drug addiction treatment market for medications was, I believe, estimated to be, I think it was 42 billion by like
Wow.
2021 or something. It was some insane number. So there's a lot of money behind this, right? Which is something to keep in mind because, like was said, I believe it was in a film, an estimated, the difference between a real data set and a manipulated one is worth billions. So that's something to keep in mind too. I
Yeah.
definitely know people that this has helped, and I really appreciate you giving a nod to that. And I want to do the same.
Yeah.
And it's really important for me. I'm passionate about advocating for those who don't realize the effect it might be having and
Yeah.
do really want to change, and it's standing in their way, but they don't know that because no one's had the conversation,
And really
or
that
there's
goes
no
back to,
structure around that. Like there's
that's
no,
informed
oh, it's
consent.
not helping, but no one's going to help me get off it, right? So I won't. There's that part too.
That's informed consent. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we touch on in the film the most, is that if you want to take that, that's fine. It might, it could save your life, but you should know before getting on it, okay, it's going to blunt my emotion. I might feel like I'm kind of high. I might feel nothing. What are the alternatives to that? What is the exit plan? How long am I going to be on
Yeah.
Suboxone? How long am I going to have to take this? How do I get off of it? And another thing I wanted to mention too is that a lot of these overdose deaths, a lot of people that slide over to Suboxone, they could maybe, if they had a long, slow taper of the opiate of some kind, they could prevent having to be on something else. But because we don't understand deprescribing and we yank people off of drugs and detox in 24 hours, don't you think that could have something to do with it? You know what I mean? If there was more
Totally.
of a structured way to get off, of things.
Totally.
Anyway, so you have two excellent questions I want to get to, and I know we're deviating from our script, but that's the way conversations happen. Okay, so
Improv.
here's one. It says, have you raised any of these concerns with prescribed psychiatric meds with those in the addiction industry or those who believe fully in the Western model of addiction treatment? And if so, what are the reactions to these ideas by colleagues, doctors, and patients?
Great question. And this is something I think of often because it is a controversial topic. Yes, I have. And the reaction I get is usually either, yes, this is an issue, or no, it's not. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Yes or no. I'm trying to think if I've ever had a reaction where I didn't basically get shut down at some point. So I have brought this up, but realizing it's a controversial issue, what should I do it? I try to do it tactfully, And I've learned that over the years of being so like adamant and righteous about things and having no conversation, I realized, okay, let me try to do this from a more humble place. So when I brought it up, I brought it up more as a question, hey, this looks like this to me. Is this helping? Rather than this isn't helping. Here's the study, did it, right? Even then, even coming from this grounded, peaceful place, the reaction that I get most of the time, even when people agree with it, professional colleagues, individuals, is eventually I get shut down. So what do I mean by being shut down? Well, when I pose this question on an addiction professionals group, the post gets removed. When I share about
Wait,
the film,
what
yep.
question? Like what question? When you pose this question, what do you mean by this question?
So the question is more, I don't know, a question more of a statement, but it seems to me that as the opiate crisis has been getting worse, the amount of medications being prescribed has been increasing. I've personally noticed in the addiction treatment industry, working on the front lines, that there's a correlation here between the increase in relapse and the amount of medications being prescribed. So when I see a client relapse and I'm on the front lines, or they overdose, they're usually on, most of the time, certain medications, often controlled medications.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that we have a dialogue around this.
Yeah.
If you're willing to talk more about this, then please contact me here. Please check out this film. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
And
All right. So that type of approach is, banned. And eventually I actually got banned from a group for that approach. Yeah.
Just for questioning, hey guys, what are we doing here? Like, is this
Yeah,
really
exactly.
helpful? Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whew. All right. So here's the next question. It's kind of long, so hang in there. All right. It says, I find it highly problematic that people trying to get sober go to rehab and are put on antidepressants for anxiety and depression because it's assumed that people are self-medicating with alcohol and street drugs. This falls into this false narrative that people have a chemical imbalance to explain why they drink. Brain chemical imbalance has never been proven in any scientific literature. It happened to me too. I am 19 years sober and I was on meds for 16 years because I believed a supposed recovery expert that said I drink alcoholically because I have generalized anxiety disorder. It's a crime that 80% of people in recovery from alcohol are on psych meds. Why aren't we teaching people to get sober about that? I'm sorry, why aren't we teaching people getting sober about trauma, regulating their bodies, breath work, heart math, exercise, good nutrition? We are robbing people of learning their life skills and dealing with their emotions. It's more of a statement, but that was pretty good.
Yeah. Hell yeah. My type of people. All right.
I don't know who said that, but that was good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Solid.
so I don't know what I mean, there's I don't know. There's always that question of why do you use substances? Why do people use? What do you think?
Yeah. I think this person answered that. First off, I just want to say congrats on 19 years sober to whoever this individual is. Awesome. And the inner regulation. I was just listening to answer your question, Angie.
Yeah.
Inner regulation is a big lack of inner regulation is a big reason, I think, for using. And then finding ways to regulate are very important solutions. I was just listening to this neuroscientist, Andrew Huberman, a really cool guy. And he said, first off, his definition of addiction I thought was really interesting because it kind of ties on to what you were saying. It says addiction is the progressive narrowing of things that make us feel good.
Wow. I like that definition.
Huh. Yeah. And he would also say he doesn't think a medication will ever solve the issue because when we take a medication, ultimately it's going to it's going to target the dopamine system. And when we do that, there's always a payoff in our quality of life and ability to cope, basically. Mm. And that's kind of what I hear in this statement, right? Is there's a desire to feel good. We all want to, But the way in which that's accomplished, if it's done with a substance, especially when it gets to addiction, is the payoff is just enormous, right? Our life just continues to spiral down as we try to cope. And yet there's these other ways to cope, like she was mentioning, I believe, heart math, a bunch of
I
other
have,
things in
I
there.
have it right here. This is heart math.
Oh yeah, nice,
Little thing you
nice.
put on you, and you put this on your,
Yeah,
and then you I use my iPad, and you just do this heart-centered breathing to like slow
yeah,
everything down. I just started it. Yeah, it's really good
very
stuff.
cool.
Yeah,
I used to have one of those little one of those little things too. Cool.
cool. But yeah, so
Um,
I
yeah,
also wanted to share, I think I said this on our addiction panel, but about there's lots of different theories about substance abuse. But right now, it seems to be the medical model, which is if you know, what is it? You have a disease. You have a disease in your
right,
brain,
right, right.
and you're going to
Yeah,
use drugs. And I don't know that there's papers that say when you believe in the model of disease for addiction, that your recovery rate is actually like extremely low because you believe that it's like not in your power. It's some magical disease that you have that you're gonna have to deal with the rest of your life. You're gonna take meds, which is very suspiciously close to the narrative that we have in mental health, that you have a brain disease of bipolar or depression or whatever, and you're gonna have to take meds for the rest of your life, and like life is just gonna suck for you, and it's your genetics, and there you have no power in the circumstance, right? So
totally.
I want to invite that discussion, that question of, is that true, right? Is what else could be another explanation? I really resonate with Mark Lewis. He does I think his book is like
Nice.
Addiction of Desire or something, but he said kind of what you just said, that addiction is actually a learning. You learn that if I feel like crap and I take this, let's say if I take a line of cocaine, I don't know, that I'm going to feel great. So then you learn that works. The
Yeah,
reward happens to be extremely high and extremely amazing feeling or whatever. So it's a little different than drinking a cup of coffee, but the same way that you learn, if I drink coffee in the morning, it wakes me up. If I feel like crap and I take heroin, it's going to make me feel better. It's a learning process. It's not a
yeah,
disease. You learn that it works. It works for you. And what works for you, you're going to do. So often, last thing is that often we say it's either a brain disease or it's you have no willpower. Okay, there's lots of
hmm,
other explanations in between. It's not this or that. There's
yeah.
lots of different explanations. So I just wanted to bring that in the conversation, that maybe our definition of addiction as a disease or as a brain disease is probably not correct, and maybe it is kind of, but not all the way, anyway.
Yeah, I think of that too. I think of it once again like a spectrum. I think that on either end, there's very, very low outcomes. And with thinking that if I just use more willpower, for some people that might work, but in my experience, it's for the people that haven't progressed. For the people who are like in the deepest, darkest addiction, like hardcore heroin addiction, willpower probably isn't going to work that well. At the same time, to continue with the narrative of, well, I have a disease, so I can't do anything about it. Or the only way I'll be fixed is medically. If a doctor gives me a pill, they'll fix me, right? That doesn't really work either. But I think there's this middle ground where it's okay. There is a level of damage that I don't have control over, but I do have the ability to take actions that eventually will give me control over that. Whether that's seeking out and asking for help, whether that's biochemical repair. There's really good centers that focus on healing people with medication challenges, getting them off benzos, for example, like Alternative to Meds out in Arizona is one of them. I think Inner Balance in Colorado is an addiction treatment center that focuses and implements biochemical repair specifically. So there are ways to navigate that territory, but I think that's the important part, right? It's like whatever it is, are we creating a structure that's actually effective in dealing with it?
Right.
Because whether we call it a disease or not, it's
Yeah.
still there. Whatever we call it, it's still there, and we still need to deal with it. And I think having helpful ways like this individual was saying to deal with it is really important. And last thing I want to say, because I forgot it before, was there was a neuroscientist, Judith Grisel from Bucknell, and she said addiction is like a leaky bucket, right? It just wants to keep filling itself back up.
Hmm.
And she's like, what medication assisted treatment, basically opioid replacement therapy is like just plugging a hole, not fixing the hole in the bucket. It's just basically like keep filling it up with water. so it doesn't empty, but it's not fixing the hole. And so it's not really sustainable. And I think that's the difference here with these problems with medication, just like in the film. It's like, well, yeah, it worked, a little bit at first, but we can see the horrific consequences, like in your story and in some of the other stories in the film, where it plays out over years. And that's what we don't want.
Yeah.
We do not want that. So it's really important up front to have that dialogue. And luckily there's some cool people like us starting to have it.
We're trying. Yeah, somebody had a comment that's kind of in line with this that says, I've seen anecdotally that the withdrawal from Suboxone is even worse than opiates for some people. So many would think that they would have been better off just tapering off the original opiate to begin with. It just seems like we're kicking the can down the road, but to a harder exit plan if you ever get off. So we kind of talked about that earlier, but that notion of like, you're going to go through pain coming off, whether it's a psych drug, whether it's a illegal street, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. What's the correct term for that? A recreational drug?
Yeah, that's fine.
Call that. Okay. Yeah. So it's still like there's still pain that needs to be handled, or things that need to be worked on, like the root issue of the problem. So whether you do it now or whether you kick the can down the road when you're on prescription meds for 10, 15 years, you're still going to have that pain. It's still there, Totally. All right. So here's the next one. I meet people who claim that they're sober, but when I find out they're in the psychiatric system, most likely all prescribed by a doctor to keep them sober, like the Stevie Nicks story, how she got sober from cocaine, but her psychiatrist put her on benzos, and he told her that that would be the only way she would stay sober. Anyhow, many of these sober people are taking benzos, Adderall, other meds that cause prescribed physical dependence, like antidepressants and antipsychotics. To me, I can't help but thinking that's not sober. Sure, you might be not abusing or getting high anymore since you're not taking meds as prescribed now, but sobriety is more than that, right? Is sobriety a baseline? Is it a feeling of feeling all of your feelings? So what do you think about that, the spectrum of sobriety?
Yeah, that's a deep question. And this has changed with harm reduction. It's definitely changed the narrative. It used to be, the cultural narrative used to be in addiction treatment culture, that sobriety meant abstinence. Recovery meant abstinence. Yet over this past, especially 5 years, the narrative is now sobriety and recovery is very much your own choice, what that means to you. The problem with that is, like I was talking about Daniel Coyle, who studied high performance groups, right? He says group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. But even one person that has a negative impact on the group can affect its performance drastically. And I wouldn't imply that certain definitions of recovery or sobriety are negative, but what I'm saying when I say that is, one person, if we're in a group and one person has a different agenda, it makes it very hard for that group to achieve its goal. So when we want to move towards a certain way of life and have our life get better in a treatment center, if there's like 10 different individuals, but 2 are going here and 2 it's almost impossible to create momentum moving forward.
Yeah. And
there's no objective definition. So we can't even decide what moving forward is anyway. For some people, moving forward might be, I just don't want to die. And that's amazing, right? It's a really good thing. But unfortunately, that's become the predominant narrative. And what that does is, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, it decreases the culture overall, because all we're doing now is trying to not
so low.
We're trying to just keep people alive. And there's not much quality of life improvement, not much growth, because how can there be? The medications that are being prescribed affect the ability to stay engaged, the ability and desire to grow. Even like Dr. Janoff in a book, Why We Get Sick, How We Get Well. He talks about internally produced endorphins, basically opiates. They kill pain. But what they also do is they block the healing process for a period of time. So when we kill pain, what we're doing is we're stopping the natural healing process, right? But same thing with external painkillers, external opiates, they block the natural healing process. So it seems like I'm fixed, gotten better.
Yeah.
But what's really happening is it's just like a reprieve, right? but it doesn't stay there, because over time there's these effects like we saw in the film, right? Things get worse. I can get more addicted, like to Suboxone. I've heard the same thing. The detox is worse than heroin.
Yeah.
So, how do we navigate this culture, right? And have a common narrative. And I think that comes back to having discussions, and not just public like this, but in small communities and treatment centers.
Right.
Because I think it'd be awesome if we could have two different tracks of treatment, because they're going to be two different methods and two different goals, right? Okay, we agree. You know what the consequences of these medications are. For whatever reason, or desire or just necessity, that's the track you want to go down. Okay, perfect. You know that you want this way of life, and so you're going to do these things instead without the medications or weaning off the medications. Perfect. You're going to do these things over here.
Yeah.
Right?
So
It's possible to do, I'll just say this real quick. It's possible to do both, but eventually one's going to win out. So what I mean by that is you don't have to like wait to stop medications to do yoga or eat well or anything like that. At the same time, I've seen individuals have a really hard time doing those things that would lead to a better quality of life and a better outcome while they're continually on the medications.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, so kind of what you're speaking to is like a patient-centered approach. It's not this cookie cutter protocol that if you come off of opiates, this is what you get. This is the treatment that you're going to get, depending on what you're able to afford, like as in a treatment center, or what your insurance will cover, or if you're in a Medicaid bed, that this is just kind of what you're going to get for whatever.
Yeah.
It's not like, let's sit you down and what are your goals, and how sober or clean. I don't even know if I want to conflate those two, but do you want to do a step down approach where Suboxone for a month and then this, and then how do you want to do this? Like, here's all of your options, here's all of the benefits and alternatives, and again, that's informed consent that we're not getting, whether you're on prescription psychiatric drugs or from the addiction side. Yeah,
for sure.
So here's a comment. This is just a comment. My 16-year-old daughter went through a severe eating disorder and depression. 3 years later, she is on 2 dangerous antidepressants and a sleeping aid. These drugs are causing worse problems and horrific withdrawal symptoms as we taper. No one warned me. Doctors just want to give her more drugs. I don't know where to get help for her. She hides in her room and she suffers. I'm so heartbroken and powerless to help her. I don't trust doctors anymore. Yeah, well, so I mean, that speaks to also the addiction side that, there isn't a lot of help for people coming off of meds, whether it's in the addiction world. I mean, there's no treatment center you can go to, right, to get off of psych drugs.
Alternative to meds. I think it's the only one I know of.
Yeah,
in Arizona.
And they only do like a 60-day program. It's kind of expensive, so it's not for everybody. But so a lot of people are kind of left on their own, back. Yeah. So let's see. Okay, so I guess let's go to the next question that we had pre-planned. What is the overlap between mental health challenges and substance use challenges? Sorry.
So this would be I want to touch on that last one real quick. Can we do that?
Yeah, go do whatever you want. Yeah, totally.
Because I feel like they're really looking for some support around that. So, because you're right, I didn't think about alternative to meds being a lot, obviously inpatient, a lot of money.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. There are some groups, and I know Angie, you know about these. Some of the support groups. I know there are individuals. We had a few naturopathic doctors in our last panel. That Dr. Sanal Patel, Dr. Julia Britz, Christina Veselak, who does nutrition for mental health and addiction. So there are some resources out there, and you can feel free to reach out to me, and I'm guessing, to Angie as well, for more specific feedback on that, because it's like finding a needle in a haystack. However, those needles are out there, and we can, maybe not the best analogy for like drug addiction needle analogy, but you get my point.
We forgive you.
There are people out there who have ability to help in this area, myself included, but specifically doctors. So there are professionals who can help you in this area, even though it feels daunting, even though it feels like, how the hell did I do this? Everyone just wants to give meds. That being said, that being a reality, there's also another reality, but we just have to look for it. Hence this conversation, right? Not a lot of people are having this, and yet here we are today. So glad you're here. But to move forward, what's the overlap between mental health and substance use? That's a tough one because they do overlap, and it's hard to tell necessarily, did the chicken or the egg come first?
Yeah.
When I'm looking at addiction treatment, most of the time, it's the addiction causing the mental health challenges. That was my experience coming into recovery. You know, I had used drugs for years, hard drugs, crack, drank out about a liter of vodka almost every single day for like the last year or two that I was drinking, smoked weed every day, like just that does damage to the brain, right?
Yep.
The beautiful thing about the brain is it's malleable. It can change, you know, it can change over time. When I came into recovery, there was depression, there was anxiety, but with the practices and the things I was doing, the new behaviors, moving through that pain with the support necessary to do so, moving through that pain, my brain started to change. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Now, there's still some anxiety and depression I'll have occasionally. However, it's not clear to me, A, that that's a real disorder versus part of the natural way of moving through life and being human. And B, it's definitely not clear to me that a medication would help that. It's more clear to me that things like meditation, getting outside, getting more sleep, etc., would help me. So where do they overlap? I mean, I think they're always overlapping, especially nowadays. Because another part of this, like was touched on in the film, is that the medications can lead to worse outcomes. That was like one of the first quotes in the film, right? The British Parliament inquiry found that, you know, a lot of these medications will lead to worse outcomes in the long run. Like antidepressants are associated with depression, suicide risk, violence, anxiety. Now, interestingly enough, these also are correlated with relapse. So if a client comes into treatment and is depressed because of withdrawal-induced depression and is put on an antidepressant, he might feel better for a short period of time. However, if it makes him more depressed in the long run and more anxious, most likely he or she is going to go back to their drug of choice to deal with that depression and anxiety. And Dr. Montez, like we talked about him briefly, but Dr. Montez is an addictionologist, a psychopharmacologist, and a psychiatrist. So he knows his stuff. And he would say that a lot of these patients are getting exposed to antipsychotics, antidepressants, benzos, medications like this. And he said they're going to worsen addiction because the reason they're getting prescribed a lot of these is because they're misattributed with a mental health challenge or disorder, when in reality, it's part of the withdrawal healing process. Not all the time, but I would say much more often than we ever talk about or acknowledge. And that's going to play out in what he says, a really bad way. This was back in, I believe, 2010, he did these videos, or maybe even a little later, between 2010 and 2015. Regardless, the disability rate in 2012, 1 in 5 Americans were disabled. And it's been increasing since then. And a lot of professionals that are willing to talk about this would say this is because of the way that medications affect one's ability to cope with life and to simply have the will to take productive action, to work, for example. The last thing I'll say on that is this is something I've noticed in treatment culture, especially when there's a lot of meds being prescribed, is a lot of individuals just wanting to get on disability and wanting to get an employment. And granted, right now, a lot of us need it due to COVID, but I've also seen the discrepancies there, like they're able to do things when they want to do. They're able to, function, and you see the culture. So, well, if that person can just kind of get disability and lay back, why shouldn't I be able to? And I've actually had conversations like this with individuals, and it becomes, once again, this groupthink culture where it just validates itself regardless of how crazy the narrative is.
Well, if you're selling the narrative that you have a brain disease of addiction that you have no control over and you're going to have to stay engaged in treatment for the rest of your life, and on top of that, now you have a mental illness that wasn't your fault either, that's some genetic basis that it just landed on you. What is the drive for productive age?
Totally.
If my life is going to suck, then what am I supposed to do? You know what I'm saying? That takes, it's like, kills your hope.
Totally.
Yeah. Ugh.
And that's why it's important to have little microcosms like this. Because my whole thing, the content I do, the things I'm passionate about, the experiences I've had, my goal is to create an ecosystem. That's the word I'm looking for. A small ecosystem of practices and narratives that create a different outcome. And I know that's possible because I've experienced it and I've experienced those practices and those narratives, but bringing it into a place, that's the hard part, because it's like, there's a lot of resistance, and it's mostly psychological. It's mostly beliefs. It's not so much even the actions like you're talking about. It's like the belief that there's no hope, right? That's what really fuels the desire to engage in just take a minute and lay back, just do this, just smoke, just do these things that are going to lead to probably a worse outcome versus, well, why not try meditation? Why not try getting outside? But if there's no hope, then there's no reason to, right? And it's trying to shift the narrative to show that there's some hope, right? And that's where people like us come in.
Yeah, and if you're not given that as an option, like when you go to a psychiatrist and you're in an addiction treatment center and you say, I'm feeling really down, like I'm feeling upset about what I did in my addiction and I'm having a lot of regret and guilt and shame, and then you're being sold that that's depression, here's a pill for that. I mean, what is that?
Totally.
That is a message, that
Very
your feelings
much.
aren't maybe even worthy to be listened to. Like, just take a pill and don't think about what happened or what you did or what you regret and your friends that you lost or whatever. But then also, what was the other part? Oh, that you're not learning a skill to cope with that. Okay, when I'm sad, I need to journal and I need to call a friend and I need to do some service work. I need to attend a meeting. Some addiction treatment centers do that, but
there's definitely some, but mostly there's not. A lot of the narrative, like you're saying, what we're talking about is very much a systemic challenge. Like there's treatment centers, individuals, professionals that are speaking out, but they're hard to find, and it's definitely not the common experience. What you're talking about is.
Yeah, so let's end on kind of that. Hold on, let's see. There's one more. Similarly to what you all are discussing, one of the 12 steps is that you're powerless over your addiction. What do you think about that step? They're asking, Dylan, what do you think about that you're powerless?
If we're talking about addiction, then in the context of the 12 steps, I would agree. But if you look at step 2, it goes on to explain like where the power is. So when I think to myself, I'm powerless over crack, that's a true statement for me. Meaning when I take crack and when I smoke crack, or drink, it creates a biological response. And this is where addiction is different, right? Not just a physiological response, but it creates a biological and mental response where I'm going to continue to want more and take actions to get more, despite my conscious intention not to. So in that sense, yes, I'm powerless. But regardless of how you view the 12 steps, I think anybody that's looking to really change will acknowledge that there needs to be a sufficient change in power.
Yeah.
Right. So that power can come from other people. Some people to be fair, like it could be a medication for a period of time. Right. So Suboxone's more powerful than than the individual left alone. So Suboxone can help someone to stay alive and not relapse or not overdose. Now over time, I don't think so. I think other things need to be in play, but those other things are, even more important, where we get more power by engaging in support groups. We get more power by engaging in healthy activities, but that power isn't like getting like someone outside. It's more like a symbiotic relationship. When I get support, I find support in myself. It's basically like it was talked about before, learning to be self-sustainable and regulate myself, but I can't do that alone. That's where I'm powerless. But eventually I'll get that power. When my brain changes, my behavior changes, eventually get to the point where, I actually can deal with this myself today. I don't need necessarily to call my sponsor right away or to, whatever it is, right? Like that ability to deal with life in a realistic, natural way will increase. And if you look at the steps, it's a very similar trajectory, right? Now, that belief in God, higher power, I have faith in that way, but I don't necessarily think you have to look at it that way. I think it's just, we need to find a different level of power, and there are very specific actions we can take, and they don't need to be the same, but there are actions we can take to find that power. Does that make sense?
I love it. I love
Cool.
it. All right. So let's
Cool.
end on one. I want to hear your final thoughts, but I'm also wondering, and I'm sure the audience is too, like, what is the solution to this? What needs to change? Where is the hope in the addiction industry? And then just kind of wrap us up and give us some closing thoughts.
Cool. I'm really glad we're bringing it back home with that, because after all this talk, I'm like, I can only imagine like people that listen sometimes like, oh my God, like there is nothing good in this industry. But there are definitely some amazing people, some great conversations like we're having here, and there's some really, really good resources. So where is the hope? So like we was just talked about, I believe the hope is in action and conversation. The neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, who I was talking about before, he would say that the best way to change is to focus on intrinsic rather than extrinsic values. So what he means by that is, instead of focusing on, well, I need to, for example, get this med and then I'll be okay. He talks about it more of like, what do I need to change in myself? And from there, getting something externally, right? So for a lot of us who are looking for hope to get off a med, or maybe you have no desire to get, this isn't about like, you have to get off meds. It's just a conversation. And part of that is, are they helping? And if they're not, then we want to support you in finding ways to, get off that. But where is the hope? The hope is in action. What do I mean by that? I mean by action that is grounded in outcomes and grounded in the way of life that we want to live. So for example, there was one woman who was taking opiate medication and was able to reduce that by 75% using meditation. Not medication, but meditation. Meditation has also been shown to rewire the brain, has also been shown to give us the ability to be more present. I don't know if you're like me, but I'll live in the past and the future. Some people say 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the future, pissing on the present. But, to be able to be present really is to be able to enjoy life, like be able to go outside and actually be there, enjoy it. Another thing is getting outside. One article recently showed vitamin D as a really good thing for recovery. Yoga has been shown to do numerous things for our body. There's like this list of this Dr. Timothy McCall, 40 different ways yoga heals the body. Wow. So all these things are based in action and promote long-term outcomes. So what I would suggest is, I'll wrap this up now. What I would suggest is looking at where one would want to be 5 years from now, and look at people who are living that type of life and start to connect with them however you can. Follow their content. If you can get in touch with them and ask them questions, if they have a program, if they went through a certain process, find out how to go through that process yourself. Mainly mirroring those actions and behaviors of the individuals who are where you want to be and have struggled with what you've struggled with. That's an important one too, because some people will give advice without having any idea what you've been through. I feel very confident to give somebody advice on, or suggestions on, recovery and addiction, right? However, other parts of life, maybe not so much. So hope is based in action and finding those people and those communities that are taking those actions and doing those things that you want to be doing 5 years from now, and learning from them how to get there and what to do. Because part of that is the narrative. The narrative is going to be a lot different. Just like our narrative, Angie, is a lot different than the common narrative, right? And people here may have heard this for the first time. They may walk away being like, whoa, their paradigm is shifted from the result. Maybe not. But that's how it happened for me. I had issues with, not issues, I had concerns with medication for years. Mm-hmm. And when I came across Medicating Normal, the film, it was like, finally, someone freaking nailed it. Wow. Because I had and I'd heard here and there, but it was like disjointed, but I was like, finally, someone nails this. And your quote about no conversation around it as someone who's not just a professional, but as someone who's experienced the harshest effects, like 18 medications, and no one ever said maybe it's an issue. Like that quote right there, and the film was just like, boom, that nailed it. It was like, yes, that's what we need to talk about. That's the narrative we need to start promoting. Not like an anti-medication, but that's the piece, the subtle distinction we need to nail. And so when we start to develop these healthy actions, we start to find people that are like us, and the narrative starts to change, and then we start to attract more of that and have more of an impact on the greater whole. At least that's my experience. It's slow and steady, but it is starting to happen. So come join us. That's all I'll say.
I like that. That was wonderful. All right. Well, that brings us to a close. I really liked that conversation. I feel like we could have gone another hour, but
right.
We'll keep it short and leave it there. So thank you all so much for joining us for our 6th of many more interviews to come. If you haven't seen Medicating Normal yet, please check our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch, and you'll see a list of upcoming screenings. Our next screening is next Saturday, December 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's New York time. And we're going to have Carly Hebert, who's had a conversation like me and Dylan, and Chris Page. They're both trauma therapists. Awesome. And we will be adding like 2 more panelists very soon. So look for that announcement. And then also we have new videos on our YouTube channel every Wednesday and Friday. So you'll see me and Dylan's conversation probably next Friday. If you have any suggestions for people that you think we should talk to or interview, please put it in the comment section below. And you can see all the upcoming events and interviews on our events tab on our Medicating Normal Facebook page. Lastly, Dylan, thank you for joining me. I just really like you. I don't know. You have like the nice, most peaceful vibe. Like I feel like you're so authentic and you're vulnerable and you're genuine. And that is what I value in dialogue, and just like putting it out there, being yourself. So I really had a good time. Thank you for hosting the screen about addiction, and thank you for tonight. All right.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for showing up.
And where can people find you, Dylan?
So they can find me best way to find me is YouTube or Instagram. So YouTube, Dylan Lundgren, that's my channel. Dylan, D-Y-L-A-N. You'll see, it's too long to spell here. Dylan Lundgren on YouTube or Instagram.
Lundgren. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone remembers.
All right. Everybody have a nice week. Thank you so much. Bye, Dylan.
Bye.